Hello and welcome to Written Words, Lesson 4, The End. In this lesson we are going to explore how to write an effective ending and how Robert Louis Stevenson uses language to hint that all is not necessarily over. In our earlier lesson on how to begin a piece of writing, we looked at what makes a good opening sentence. But what is the best way to end a story or an essay or any other piece of writing? Recently, I was reading Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, and I was struck by how many chapters ended with a very short, abrupt sentence. Here are a few examples, but before I read the examples, I must warn you that this lesson may contain some very mild spoilers because we're talking about endings. However, the quotes that I've chosen I don't think give away too much of the storyline. So here are a few examples of the chapter endings in the Da Vinci Code. Chapter 28 ends with face down. Chapter 49 ends with the wooden box was gone. And chapter 64, then everything went black. The Da Vinci Code is a thriller. It's designed to excite and to make the reader want to keep turning the pages. It's what we call a page turner or a pot boiler. So the end of each chapter is often a shock or a puzzle, what we call a cliffhanger. It leaves you hanging off the edge of a cliff, so you can't stop there. You have to keep reading on because you want to find out the answer to that puzzle that you've just been left with. So you have to read on into the next chapter to find out what happens. In terms of plot, the climax of the action usually occurs shortly before the end of the actual story. If you've ever seen a diagram of a plot arch, the story begins, then it rises up to its climax, and then shortly before the end it comes back down again. The final few pages are often just a summing up, especially in the case of a mystery story where at the end everybody gathers round and we find out how the culprits did what they did. And it's here that the loose ends are tied up and things finally calm down after the adventures that have gone before. If the book is part of a series, the author uses the end of the story very often to set up the premise for the next book. A good story, though, will not answer every single question. It will leave the reader with a little bit of something to wonder about, something to keep chewing over, and perhaps a hint that isn't the end. There might be more adventures to come. So let's take a look at some of the books that we looked at the beginnings of in our earlier lesson. But this time, let's look at how they end. First of all, Matt Haig's The Midnight Library. This doesn't so much end with a hint, but more of a statement that this is not the end. It says, "And Nora smiled as she stared at all the pieces she had still left in play, thinking about her next move." And then It by Stephen King manages to mix reminiscence with a sprinkling of doubt. Or so Bill Denborough sometimes thinks on those early mornings after dreaming, when he almost remembers his childhood and the friends with whom he shared it. So the doubt comes from, or so he thinks. The author is suggesting that what he's thinking isn't necessarily accurate. And he says that he almost remembers. So the whole book is what he's remembered, but the author is now telling us that he's almost remembered, so perhaps he hasn't told us everything. In an essay or other piece of non-fiction writing, the ending is a conclusion. The writer will summarise the points discussed and then use them to reach some kind of verdict or interpretation. If you're writing an essay, it should be clear from the final paragraph what viewpoint you have reached. Unlike in fiction, the reader shouldn't be left wondering what was meant. It should be very clear. However, with literary non-fiction, there may still be room for some element of intrigue or challenge in order to hook the reader's attention, as at the end of Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. He ends with, "We really are at the beginning of it all. The trick, of course, is to make sure we never find the end. And that, almost certainly, will require a lot more than lucky breaks." Our extract for this lesson is quite short. It's the final paragraph from Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And it says this: "The bar silver and the arms still lie, for all that I know, where Flint buried them, and certainly they shall lie there for me. Oxen and wain ropes will not bring me back again to that accursed island, and the worst dreams that ever I have are when I hear the surf booming about its coasts, or start upright in bed with the sharp voice of Captain Flint still ringing in my ears. 'Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!' The narrator here tells us in no uncertain terms that he thinks the island is not a nice place. He uses some language to indicate that the island is hostile and not pleasant. He calls it accursed. He talks about the sharp voice of Captain Flint. He talks about his worst dreams that are filled with the island. And he says that oxen, huge, strong animals, and wain ropes, so oxen that are harnessed up to carts, could not drag him back to that island. So strong is his desire not to go there. However, Stevenson sprinkles in a little element of doubt. He hints that to anyone who wishes, more adventures may be available. If you are feeling stronger than the narrator, you may wish to go and claim the treasure that's still there. The first sentence in this paragraph points out the bar silver and the arms still lie, for all that I know, where Flint buried them. He's happy to leave them there, but should you wish to have an adventure like the one in this book, you could go and try and claim that. At the very end, he quotes the words of Captain Flint, the parrot. Pieces of 8, pieces of 8, coins, silver coins, they're there for you to claim. So the very last words of the book remind you there's treasure still out there. So by doing that, he is issuing a slightly veiled call to action. The narrator doesn't want this treasure, but you can go and get it if you like. Now let's take a look at the grammatical side of endings. So in our language focus, we're going to look at the punctuation at the end. Basic English grammar teaches us that sentences should begin with a capital letter and end with a full stop. However, there are other ways to end a sentence. A question mark can be used if it's a direct question. For example, will anyone go in search of the remaining treasure? We can end that with a question mark because it is a direct question. However, I wondered whether anyone would go in search of the remaining treasure is not a direct question, so we still need a full stop at the end of that one. Then we can use exclamation marks at the ends of sentences. Exclamation marks express surprise, or where the tone of voice is raised, such as pieces of 8. It's an exclamation from the parrot. So we can put an exclamation mark at the end of that phrase instead of a full stop. However, do be careful with exclamation marks. It can be tempting to use them quite a lot, but they're more effective when they are used sparingly, so do beware of overusing them. And then there is the ellipsis. An ellipsis is a series of 3 dots which indicate that something is missing. In a quotation, for example, it shows that you've just missed out a part of the quotation. In a story, it could show that a speaker is trailing off before finishing a sentence. So, for example, I was going to say, and then what they were going to say is missed out. So you could put an ellipsis in there. Or the author could be suggesting that there is more to come. For example, to be continued. However, like the exclamation mark, the ellipsis should be used sparingly. If it's used too much, the writing begins to look cluttered and it loses its effect. So just use it occasionally and in the right place. Our writing prompt for this lesson is an imaginative one. Imagine you are coming home after a long adventure. You walk into your home. What do you do? What are you thinking about? Does anything unexpected happen to you? How does your adventure end? As usual, there is a worksheet to accompany this lesson, so do take a look at it. It recaps all the points that we've discussed and provides some ideas for further reading as well. Thank you very much for joining me in this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson, and in the meantime, happy writing.